It is really nice to see you as always. Even in terrible, chaotic times, there's power in coming together as a community to learn and to be engaged in Jewish study. So thank you for making the time, as always, to be here and learn together. Today, I want to talk about God in the ruins. There's a very powerful Midrash, and Sheila and I were actually just kind of talking about this before class began, but the question of when you experience destruction and tragedy, theologically, a natural response is, where is God? And there's a very powerful Midrash that features Rabbi Yossi praying in the ruins after the destruction of the temple. And there he meets Elijah, and he hears God in the ruins, but in a uniquely midrashic way. So I want to explore this midrash in the context of trying to grapple with being a person of faith, being somebody in relationship with God in the face of destruction and tragedy. And for the rabbis, of course, everything was tied up in the temple. That was where God was. That was how you communicated and engaged with the divine. So in the destruction of the temple, how do you adapt to post-exile and diaspora Judaism? How do you find God in exile? So that's also going to be one of the big questions that we explore today. Yeah. And Midrash turns out to be one of the keys in terms of how do you interact with and access God in diaspora, and the answer is Midrash. So that's sort of like the meta Midrash that we're doing today as we go into the specifics now. In order to have some helpful context before we dive in, there is a quote from Jeremiah, and this is what's going to be midrashically inverted in today's Midrash. So, but we need to know the original. So for some context for this quote, Jeremiah is a prophet who experienced the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians. And he is quoting here, or he is being quoted here as picturing God's response to the Jewish exile as God roaring like a lion in vengeance for the Jewish people. That God gives Jeremiah a cup of wine to give to all of the enemy nations to drink. The wine, usually wine is joy in Judaism, right? Like at a wedding and all Shabbat. But here it's the cup of vengeance. Jeremiah is supposed to give all these enemy nations the cup of vengeance to drink. That's the context. What did you say?
Maybe it's laced with something.
Maybe it's laced. Actually, it's just Manischewitz, which is the worst kind of punishment. I'm kidding. Do you? Okay. Maybe it's good cooking wine. Good cooking. Fair. Who would like to read the first verse, Jeremiah here? And thanks again to everybody joining in person and over Zoom. And of course, any volunteers, whether you're here in person or Zoom. Yes, please.
God from on high and bellows from the holy dwelling, roaring aloud over the earthly abode and uttering shouts like the grape treaders against all the dwellers on earth.
Good. And I think the reference to the grape treaders, again, that's like grapes of wrath, right? Treading for the cup of vengeance. So this is a picture of God as what in the face of Jewish oppression? A lion. Right. So why a lion, and what does that evoke? What's the strength, leadership? Absolutely. Strength and leadership. What else? Lion of Judah, right, is a uniquely Jewish symbol, right? The symbol of the tribe Judah, which is our main tribe. Dominance, right? It's also loud, right? A lion's roar is a unique sound that we can all picture very clearly as one that's fierce and loud and foreboding, easy to hear, right? Certainly easy to hear. And by the way, if anybody needs an extra source sheet, I have a pile here of extras. So feel free to grab a copy. Good. Okay. So let's continue, because the question is, when you and by the way, we're going to have many processing sessions. Today is going to be a Midrash class. We're going to continue to dive into Midrash, but it's impossible not to be feeling what we're feeling and to link this. I chose this topic specifically because of its relevance to our current moment. But just so everyone knows, there will be processing tonight, tomorrow, and on Shabbat. So as a community, we could come together and grieve and mourn and process emotionally. But in the wake of something like this, do you experience God the way Jeremiah is describing here? As a lion roaring?
No,
No, how come, Jerry?
because it's a sad time. It looks like instead of power, we're powerless.
Oh, okay. So Jerry is saying, no, because a lion is a symbol of power. And in these moments, we feel powerless. So God as a lion roaring is not a symbol that fully speaks to how we would access God in this moment. And Helena said, where is God, right? God being a lion that you could hear very audibly, and a lion is a very clear and present presence. It's not a modest, meek, easy to miss creature. That is a creature you can hear and know it's there, announcing its presence. And maybe in these moments we ask ourselves, where is God? And so certainly we don't experience God as a roaring lion. Yes.
God is invoked on both sides of this conflict. Same God.
Yeah.
Right. And talking about this specific conflict, if you are dealing with two peoples and two religions who are both conceiving of perhaps the same God, but in very different ways, right? Especially if we're talking about a larger conversation on Judaism and Islam, right? That's certainly a shared God, though, different religious traditions branching off.
Different values.
Different values.
It's interesting because the way it's written here, the bellowing, the roaring, the shout against the dwellers on earth, I think is God here, and maybe this is blasphemy, as Israel attacking. Israel now is acting as God and the lion, and really not thinking much, just doing.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from Sheila is part of the Zionist movement, right, was taking our fate into our own hands, not waiting for the Mashiach to come. And that's going to be very important in our Midrash, right? Do we sit around and wait for Elijah to herald, our redemption? Or do we take our fate into our own hands? And if you go so far as Sheila is suggesting, not saying it's your personal opinion, maybe is, maybe not, but do we then, if you go to the extreme, replace God in that way, saying we're not waiting around, but we are, or more religiously speaking, you could say the only hands that God has is our own. Not that we're replacing God, but that we are partners with God and need to step up, not just wait around for God to send a Messiah or to resolve our conflicts for us. Good. Thank you. So now I'd like to move on to our Midrash. This is from Brachot, the first Masechet of the Talmud, of the Bavli. It's a long one, so we may divide it up a little bit, but who wants to kick us off? We'll do the English, but I'll leave both up on the Zoom for now. Any volunteers?
I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Rabbi Yossi said, I was once walking along the road when I entered the ruins among the ruins of Jerusalem to pray. I noticed that Elijah, of blessed memory, came and guarded the entrance for me and waited at the entrance until I finished my prayer. When I finished praying, Elijah said to me, greetings to you, my rabbi. I answered him, greetings to you, my rabbi, my teacher. And Elijah said to me, my son, why did you enter this ruin? I said to him, to pray. And Elijah said to me, you should have prayed on the road. And I said to him, I was afraid that I might be interrupted by travelers and be unable to focus. Elijah said to me, you should have recited the abbreviated prayer. Rabbi Yossi concluded, at that time, I learned from him three things. I learned that one may not enter a ruin, and I learned that one may pray along the road, and I learned that one who prays along the road recites an abbreviated prayer.
Okay, so let's pause and unpack this a little bit. So Rabbi Yossi, 2nd century Pana, right? So he is living post destruction of the temple. Obviously, in this story, he comes across the ruins and he stops to pray in the ruins. And Elijah doesn't stop him from doing that, right? Even though Elijah will rebuke him lightly for having done that, he lets him finish his prayer, which I think is significant and interesting, right? Waits for him. He's not going to interrupt his prayer. But first of all, why stop and pray at the ruin? Why is Rabbi Yosei doing that in the first place? What are some motivations you can imagine? Sorry?
It's quiet.
It's quiet, sure. Quiet in the ruins. So why would you want quiet in prayer? Concentration and focus, right. So Rabbi Yosei is wanting to pray in the ruins because if he's on the way, the issue is he would be distracted by people, right? He wants a quiet place so he won't be interrupted. So he goes into the ruins. Yeah, other reasons why he might.
I'm just wondering about the praying in the ruins. I guess we're not following that today, because I know when not this synagogue, the other one went on their Israel trip, we made a point of praying on Masada. We made a point of praying at the wall.
Right.
Both are ruins.
Right. Good. So I think there is a specific concern being addressed here, because this is immediately in the wake of the destruction of the temple. So I think praying at the ruins at this moment, as opposed to today, says something different, right? Today we do it as an act of, well, there's a certain spirituality in these places that link us to our history, that link us to crucial moments of Jewish history. If it's proximity to Kodesh Kodeshim, the Kotel, the temple, right? Even though it's just a wall, it's just a retaining wall. There's a spiritual power to praying in these places. And I don't know that the concern about praying in a ruin applies today in those spaces like it does here in this text, which is maybe a hesitance and refusal to move on from the destruction, right? That it maybe what Rabbi Yossi is doing is refusing to adapt to a new way of accessing God, right? If you're clinging to the ruins, it reminds me of when God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah and says to Lot's wife, what? Don't look back. And what happens when she does? Yes. She turns to a pillar of salt. So I think there is a danger in refusing to move on in moments of destruction, because then you're frozen, right? You're frozen in time. You're paralyzed. So I think, Ron, the distinction here is it's not that, and there may be more rabbinic concerns about praying in ruins halakhically that we can get into, maybe danger, maybe other things like that. But I think here it's the idea that there's a, oh, Nelson, if you don't, it's me. Oh, good. Yeah, muting. Thank you. Perfect. There's a little feedback that maybe the issue here, the concern is refusing to adapt and move on in a moment that calls for ingenuity and re-evaluation of our Jewish prayer life, which now can no longer be tied up in the temple. Okay, wow, this whole table. Let's go down this way. Okay, yeah.
There's another aspect, especially for close in time to when Jerusalem was put to ruins, and that is it's a burial site as well. It's an unclean place.
Good. Tuma, right? The issue of ritual purity. If a ruin is a site of death and a burial site of sorts, then there's a spiritual concern about not being in a state of purity, just like, Kohanim can enter a cemetery. There are ritual concerns. Good. Let's go. We'll go down there and then end with Helena.
What's the status of the Holy of Holies after the destruction of the temple? You could end up under a church in a place where you're not allowed to be.
Good. Maybe there's a concern about, I'm thinking about, when the ark was wobbling and he went to study it, and then he was smitten and struck down, and King David was really upset. And there's a sense of desecrating holy sites that maybe it is too holy a site for us to just individually interface with. So maybe there's that concern. That's a good point. We'll keep going down the table and end here.
Secondary, because it's slightly an answer to this concern that's just being discussed, but I recall when we toured the tunnels, I think one of the times we were in Jerusalem, one of the things that struck me is the men's only shul is further away theoretically from the Holy of Holies than where the women are forced to pray in the tunnel. Just interesting.
Wait, say more about, okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, they have a shul where they're praying, but it's men only. So if the women want to pray privately, they have to do it in the tunnel. And we were told while we were touring through, don't bother them. They're praying. But the good news is they're closer to the Kodesh Kodeshim than that shul is.
Interesting.
So I don't know if that's a good excuse for excluding the women, but that's the way that played out, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I'm gonna bring in, and if I'm going in the wrong direction, please either correct me or stop me. But the first time I studied this in a different context, what I remember learning from that particular rabbi that was leading that class was that if the abbreviated prayer referenced here is like Havienu, we don't do that. We only do the Shemona Esrei. We don't do that. Pretend it doesn't exist. Don't do that. And it occurred to me that although I haven't done it, and I don't know that it's done very much, it is in the complete Sidur Sim Shalom. So it hasn't disappeared. And so we didn't deal with the question of why should you say the abbreviated prayer, or why was it okay for him to say the abbreviated prayer, even if it's not okay for us? And it may have something to do with relative danger, relative distraction.
Yeah.
And I think what that particular rabbi was trying to teach us was set aside the right times to do the full prayer without distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't deal with the issue of, well, what if you actually want to pray and you are on the road and there's no minion? Right.
Yeah. And we're going to dive back into this a little deeper in just a moment. I want to get to everyone's comments, but the Rabbi Yossi here does not do the abbreviated. He does the full prayer in the ruins, and Elijah rebukes him about that, saying it was not proper to enter the ruin to pray. In fact, you should have done it on the road, and you should have done it abbreviated, which is counterintuitive to what you might think, Elijah the prophet to say, right? But that's the difference between adapting to a new world order and trying to access God in a new way versus clinging to, you know what, this is how we used to do it. I will do. And I think the other thing is that the full service represents temple service as it was done formally, and the abbreviated is sort of like, we can metaphorically understand that to be diaspora prayer in the exile, non-temple service. So even if we do a full prayer, we don't skip anything. I'm understanding our current non-temple based prayer as what Elijah might mean as abbreviated prayer. I think in the Peshat, he's saying, no, an abbreviated prayer, like you can just do the Chatimot, or just do the Shemona Esrei, but just, as you're going, so just do the bare halachic minimum. I think that's what's meant in the Peshat. But I think midrashically, we could understand it to mean that the full service means the temple service as it was done. And Elijah is saying we don't pray in the ruins, meaning diaspora is okay now, right? And that's going to bring back Jeremiah in a moment, who also gives the Jews permission to live in diaspora. I think Elijah is doing the same. We don't pray in ruins, meaning it is okay and in some instances necessary for us to now rebuild elsewhere for the time being. Our hearts always remaining in Israel, but if we must be in diaspora, Judaism must survive in a new form. And the abbreviated prayer being no longer clinging to our temple service, because that's gone now. We pray for its pray for its restoration. Of course, that never loses our Jewish hopes and dreams. But we have to now adopt an abbreviated prayer, meaning something that looks different than the temple service. Sheila, and then Helene.
When I look at it, it's funny because I wasn't thinking that this was an ordinary day when he just happened to be in the room, they're not on the road.
Mhm.
But thinking of today, two things. I think some of the things we've done I think it was in this class, but we talk about you need to pray to something concrete. You can pray anywhere you want, but when you see the Ark, the Aron Kodesh, it has a different effect on you. You
Right.
need something concrete, and the room is something concrete. It reminds you what you're praying about in a way. And today, I think that people are praying at the site of the massacres.
Right, right,
And they don't want to pray on the road. They want, if they see it,
right.
then it has a different effect on you when
Yeah.
you see something.
Absolutely. And the temple worship was very sensorial. That's something that Rabbi Alex talks a lot with the Wellness Center, wanting it to be holistic. And we had incense, there were smells, and there were sights, and there was drama, and there was location. What is one of God's names?
Hamakom.
Hamakom, the place, right? Place is crucial and very important. And if you go too far, it's a point that Ron whispered in my ear, which is golden calf, right? If you, that urge, if it's fed without check, you could get to the pitfall of the golden calf, saying, where is Moses? Where is God? We need a physical representation of God, but that's quite different than tapping into the spirituality that a physical space allows to engender a deeper prayer. Yes.
But what I wanted to make a point is you can pray anywhere
Mhm.
and you're close to God anywhere.
Yes.
Especially in this time.
Good.
So my niece was hiding in a bush for 20 minutes with bullets around her. She's not religious person, the youngsters are not. And she was praying to God to save her.
Yeah. Right.
So it doesn't matter where you are.
Right.
If you feel the need to pray, maybe that's what Elijah was.
Good. I do think that's what Elijah means, right? That God can be accessed anywhere, especially in the wake of the destruction of the temple. If we make the fallacy of believing that that's the only site God can be accessed, then Judaism's over, right? But if we believe that God can be accessed on the road, right, then we survive. Ron, you have a point or question? Okay, good.
I was going to bring up the point that talking about needing something physical. I think we make too much out of the Torah scrolls.
Yeah.
We are making idols out of them. It's the words that are important, not the scroll.
Yeah, right. So
We are.
right. No, I think we run risk in a lot of different ways, right? Do we put the Torah too high up on a pedestal in terms of the physical scroll that we get up and kiss and stand for? I think there's one thing about respect and sanctity. There's another when you make a false god out of something or ascribe too much. So I think it's a delicate dance. Same with the kotel, right? Like this, if you can be wrapped up in spiritual fervor. And I think that's part of what we're talking about how physical place can inspire a deeper prayer life. And that's great. There in Kabbalah, right? There are, I had a rabbi and teacher who once said, if you haven't davened, and he's very spiritual, he's very, very cool and plays the guitar. Anyway, he said, if you haven't davened at the kever of a Rebbe, meaning the gravesite of a Rebbe, it's like, a relationship without romance. It's like he was saying that was where he like really, and I feel like, what do we do it? Wow. Like, what,
For him.
Right. But I personally have so much trouble imagining myself praying at the gravesite of a Rebbe, because that to me feels like I'm like praying to a soul of a departed rabbi. Sure. Yeah.
In the same cemetery as the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Mm-hmm.
So we went
Wow.
to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Mm-hmm.
Idol worshiping?
Yeah.
I mean, really,
Yeah.
you went there, they have everything is set up, the candles are set up.
Yeah.
Pieces of paper are set up. You can only go in there and you
Right.
see all pieces of paper with the stone in the middle.
Yeah.
And you come out and then the woman says to you, didn't you put a kettle in? And she kept bugging
Yeah.
my husband. Finally, I said to her, he's a conservative rabbi, and then she shut up. But
Yeah.
Can I interrupt just for a minute? Sheila, you'll be mad, don't be mad. All right, everything we have here is compostable. These, we found out these plates are all the food, and the white napkins.
The only thing that isn't are the metal spoons and the plastic cups. So everything, we're gonna have a bucket here and we're gonna do that.
Incredible.
And I'm gonna say one other thing, because I'm not a popular person and good. Every time we do this, it costs some money, and I know people put in money, but if you figure we spend, let's say, where can you get lunch for $5 a person? We have $5 a person, we figure 20 people. So every time it costs like $100. So just think about that. I'm just letting you know, okay?
Thank you, Murray.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
very
Thanks so
much.
much for always for feeding us and take care. And yeah, the composting is very exciting.
Yeah.
Money, there's a couple.
Oh, there's a cup, I guess, a little push cup.
Up, or you could just give it to me.
Um,
To compound the thing
uh-huh.
was that they had people, they were putting on the garters.
Yeah,
They took off their shoes and were putting on Crocs.
Huh.
If this wasn't idol worship or.
right. Yeah. So I want to say two things. One is I relate to that because personally I get a little uneasy about it, and that's sort of my instinct as well. But to honor my rabbi, Dr. Giller, who's really an amazing, he would say, don't knock it till you tried it. but it's different. Like for Kabbalistically, the significance here is you're not worshiping and you're not, but that the soul of a tzaddik, there's like three components of that soul. There's the nefesh, there's the neshama. One stays at the site of where the person is buried. The other accesses, transcends to the realm of God. And it's sort of like a telephone connection. So there's a feeling that you're praying to God, but you're using the soul of the tzaddik as the intermediary, as sort of like an advanced Wi-Fi connection, like that kind of a thing that gets you.
To not have it.
I agree with you. That is why I feel, that's why I personally don't do it. But again, I think to defend that practice a little bit, it's I think the sense that there are places, just like we were saying earlier, where God can be more acutely felt. Not that God can't be accessed everywhere, but that there are certain places that sort of increase that spiritual connection. And so I think Kabbalistically, that's the mechanics there. Nelson, is your hand up? Yeah, please.
I'm sorry, I'm just a cynic about all this. I'm sure the people at the golden calf thought they were closer to God
Fair.
at the golden calf.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Thanks. Say more.
Good.
I could, but I don't want to.
Well, listen, I personally agree with you. I have not done it. To me, it feels weird and wrong, but I just want to say ours is a beautiful and rich tradition. And I don't want to put down a popular Kabbalistic practice too much, even if it's not my own, but I worry about it for the same reasons that you've all voiced. So, let's continue. So Rabbi Yossi remember, there are two kinds of Midrash. What are they? There's Midrash blank and Midrash blank. I mentioned it only once at the very start of our class, so I don't expect. Midrash halacha and Midrash Agadah. Good. Midrash halacha is legal Midrash, and then Midrash Agadah is more narrative. And we've been spending more time on the narrative because I think it has so much to glean. So does the halacha, though. But we're getting a little bit of Midrash halacha here because Rabbi Yossi concluded that he learned 3 halachot from his conversation with Eliyahu Hanavi, which are: one may not enter a ruin, one may pray on the road, and one who prays along the road recites an abbreviated prayer. By the way, there's also like a Hillel Shammai debate about this, and when they're trying to understand the Shema, right? Which you can say on the way, baderech, right? But the question is, do you stop and say? But then Hillel says, but no, you could be in danger if you stop. So you can continue to anyway. So it's a larger debate, but so that's where we're getting. And what I wanted to say midrashically,
to quickly build on what you were saying earlier, just
sure.
Purposes of clarity, is one way then to understand praying along the road, being that we're now on the road because Lut is being on the road.
Yes. So that is midrashically the point that I think is being made, which is that we can understand along the right. So we talked about Midrash halacha there, but now I think we're getting into Midrash Agadah all in the same paragraph here, that we can understand praying on the road to mean the diaspora. galut, the exile, that Elijah is giving us permission, just like Jeremiah does, to establish, Jewish life and community in Babylon and strike down roots, Jeremiah says, and it's okay to thrive outside of Israel when necessary.
The same rabbi from the other class made a point with respect to this idea that when you build a synagogue, you always leave some little part unpainted, unfinished.
Correct.
Because you don't think of it as a permanent place.
Correct. Libi b'mizrach. Like our heart is in the east. We're never totally comfortable and fulfilled outside of Israel. There's that unseverable connection and tie. But there are times in response to crisis where, the strength of diaspora is also significant and important. And in terms of accessing God, being innovative and trying to access the divine in new ways when in the rubble of the old ways. And I want to transition soon to our next point, because that's like part one of our talk. There's a part two. Go ahead, Shu.
Suddenly occurs to me is we're talking about how do we pray?
Mm-hmm.
And okay, we're talking about now this is talking about the place
Yes.
where we have the prayer.
Yes.
And I don't know if this is discussed elsewhere in the Midrash or wherever, what we wear when we're praying,
Mm-hmm.
because this really bugged me. A sermon the rabbi cannot give is how people came to shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's one thing to come, just to pray. I mean, in camp, we didn't get dressed during the weekday. And if you do just chakras in the morning, if you're in your pajamas, it's okay. But the slumperai, and that's the only word I can use. I mean, torn jeans, t-shirts.
Well, torn jeans can be
Adults. Now, I'm not the kids we expect,
Yeah.
but from adults.
Yeah.
And this really bothered me.
Mm.
As I said, it's a sermon you cannot give.
Mhm.
You're glad that they're there.
Yeah. Right.
But this is something, it's like part B of what we're discussing here.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a part of it.
Place
Sure.
and decorum.
Decorum. Sure. Respect. Yeah.
Okay,
Kavod.
I got that all out of my.
That would be the rebuttal, right? That God can be accessed anywhere and in any right. Like so right. There are two kinds of responses. One is, well, how would you dress if you were meeting the Queen of England? How much more so? Right? How much more so God, right? If you're not going to wear, your casual clothes to meet God, if you would dress up for, and that's the idolatry, right? Why would we have more respect for a human ruler than we would have for God? The flip side is our relationship with the Queen of England is different than our relationship with God, right? I feel God is an intimate part of my being and is always a part of my experience. And so, look, God knows what I look like naked, and the Queen of England does not, right? So why can't I wear pajamas? So it's an interesting debate, and it's a good. I want to move on for the sake of our topics today, but those are good points. Good. So who wants to read the next two paragraphs? Maybe somebody from Zoom or in the room. Either's good, but I want to open it up. We're starting from and after this introduction. Great. Okay, Francis, thanks.
And after this introduction, Elijah said to me, "What voice did you hear in that ruin?" I responded, "I heard a heavenly voice cooing like a dove and saying, 'Woe to the children, due to whose sins I destroyed my house, burned my temple, and exiled them among the nations.'"
I want to pause for 1 second. There's two things that are being introduced here. Good. You said it's different. What's different?
In the earlier one, God was roaring like a lion and wow, and here he's cooing like a dove after destruction.
That's the midrashic move that's being made. That God roaring as a lion on behalf of God's children, for vengeance upon their enemies, is now being transformed to God cooing like a dove, wailing like a
justice and mercy.
Maybe justice and mercy. And maybe it's two aspects. Or comfort. Another thing I want to offer is maybe it's sorrow. Like the lion's roar might be more of a battle cry. Like here, God is rousing God's self to fight on behalf of God's people. Here, it's a different image of God, which is God in pain and God crying and mourning and wailing like the soft wailing of a dove. Okay, keep going.
And Elijah said to me, by your life and by your head. Not only did that voice cry out in that moment, but it cries out 3 times each and every day. Moreover, whenever Israel enters synagogues and study halls and answers in the Kaddish prayer, may God's great name be blessed. The Holy One of blessing shakes God's head and says, happy is the King who is thus praised in his house.
Take us home, yeah.
When the temple stood, this praise was recited there. But now, how great is the pain of the parent who exiled their children, and woe to the children who were exiled from their parents' table, as their pain only adds to that of their parent.
So this is introducing a couple of theological approaches, and we can unpack them here. So some may find them helpful, some may push back. There are a couple of theological points being made. One is the rabbis do still here have this theology that we were exiled for our own sins, right? That the first temple was because of idolatry and, bloodshed and licentiousness. So our own sins, the Babylonians were strengthened to defeat us. It's not random, right? This is sort of divine retribution, but it's because of our own sins. And then this, God bless you, love you. God bless you. And then the second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, right? So baseless hatred. So in both cases, the rabbis theologically make the move that it's not that there is no God. It's not that God is silent. It's that we're being punished for our own sins. That is obviously very troubling theology. It's one that I don't personally hold. I don't perceive of a God who rewards and punishes in that way. I'm not saying you can't, but I personally don't. But there's a second bit of, there's another theological statement being made here, which is that God shares the pain of God's creatures whenever they're in pain. And that is the theological point that I'm wanting to elevate in this moment of unbearable suffering that we're going through, because you could do one of 2 things. Well, you could do a lot of different things, but you could say, where is God? There is no God. And that is valid. You're still, right? There's the saying that Jews believe in at most one God, right? But so you could still, if you don't believe in God, you're still Jewish, right? It's more than just, but the other way to look at it is, it's not that there is no God. It's that God is grieving along with us. God shares in our suffering. Thoughts and reflections on that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, please.
Well, that's like Kushner's book.
Yeah.
When the people were in the camps, Where was God? He was in the camps with them.
Right. Right. So we're bringing up Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, I assume is the one you're bringing up. But right, the idea that, it's not that God wasn't there. It's that God is there, but not in the way that a roaring lion necessarily shows up in our lives, but maybe more like the cooing of a dove, that God's presence is there, but it takes some exertion on our part to tap into it and to hear it. And to hear it crying along with us.
It's like during the Shoah, some people became more religious and some people became totally atheists.
Good. So this is a perfect segue, although, Nelson, I want to get to your point, but I just want to reiterate Helena's point, which is in the Shoah and the Holocaust, some people became more religious and some people became atheists, right? And everything in between. Our next text, which I want to get to Nelson's point before we transition into, is a rabbi who perished and was murdered in the Shoah. This is the Piazetzner Rebbe. And his theology, and he's got a book called the Eish Kodesh, Sacred Fire. But he's a Hasidic rabbi. And his way of grappling with God in the midst of the Holocaust was that God suffers along with you, and that God is there, feeling that pain, carrying it along with you. So I want to get to his source, but let's go, Nelson. Yeah.
I don't know. It's going back to an earlier point. When you get angry, you boom and you yell, and I think that's what Israel's doing right now. There's constant artillery fire, and I was talking to an Israeli yesterday who just was kept awake at night by it and couldn't sleep. But it doesn't do anything. But when the voice gets quiet, you better listen.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So there's a whole spectrum of response that's very human. But you're making me think of Kol Damamad Daka, right? That guy, and that's with Elijah, by the way. So maybe you're bringing in a really great connection here. That it's Elijah has this encounter with God, where there's an earthquake, but God is not in the earthquake. There's lightning and thunder, all these great physical, geological, natural phenomena. But God follows that up by saying, but God was not in the earthquake. God was in the Kol Damamad Daka, the still small voice. And that same Elijah is now confronting Rabbi Yossi and saying, you were correct in hearing. He's basically validating Rabbi Yossi's Midrash, saying, you were right to invert Jeremiah's lion's roar to a dove cooing. And what's more, it wasn't just in that moment that you experienced that God is, but 3 times a day, meaning Shachrit, Mincha, Marid. Whenever Jews congregate to pray, that actually causes God pain, which is counterintuitive. You would think that God rejoices in our prayer, but here there's a notion that actually is a source of pain for God, because God loves us and God grieves over our suffering, and it's only exacerbated when we follow up by praising God and magnifying God's name in the face of our suffering, right? Because God's love for us is tinged with the pain of, woe that I needed to exile my people, that I needed to, right? And that gets back to the theology of reward and punishment, which I acknowledge is not, but in our rabbinic text here, that's the assumption. But the rabbis are saying, so God may have been responsible we are responsible, but it may be God's hand punishing us, but God isn't doing it. But God is in deep pain over it, because, it's not what God wants. God suffers when we suffer. And again, part of the problem with that theology, if you do believe in the reward punishment God, is it gets to be a bit of an abusive relationship of like, but God doesn't want to be doing this, but it's for our own good, and that's triggering, and I want to apologize for even taking us there. But that is the danger of combining these two theologies of like, yes, the reward and punishment, and God is suffering when we. And I do think that that's what the rabbis in this text are suggesting. But for me personally, I like the Kushner model of God doesn't act in our lives the way Temple Judaism was, where there is God directly interacting with us in temple worship, and that's what prayer is. Whereas post-temple, God in the ruins is God does still interact with us, but it's more indirect. It's Midrash, right? Temple worship kind of is symbolic for this more direct line of communication with God. And I think diaspora exile worship is more midrashic, where we are encountering God, but it's indirect. It's this relationship. It's through our own exertion meeting God in the middle, right? It's less direct and less lion's roar and more dove cooing.
It's also
More maybe a long distance call than a local call.
also a difficulty to take it to its extreme, because it might in a sense encourage atheism if you want to strictly say there's reward and punishment, and then you don't really see a straight line. Because sometimes it seems that the guilty are rewarded, and other times it seems as if the innocent are punished.
Right.
So it's sort of above our pay grade to know what exactly is the reward and punishment.
Right. And that of course is the other theological response, which is it's beyond our capacity to know. And the P.S. Essner is going to touch on that as well. That like, look, God does have a plan. We just can't, as mere mortals, understand. And there's pros and cons to that. I think from a faith-based perspective, I am drawn to that, to say, you know what, at the end of the day, I can't know. And it's comforting for me to believe that there is a larger plan that's beyond my comprehension, and that there's still meaning to everything. But the danger there is, I've had friends tell me, well, if that's God's plan, then I don't want anything to do with that God. Right. So that there's, again, that's still the risk of the reward punishment model. Go ahead.
Back to,
You know,
we have one little spat of time. Reward doesn't have to happen in our lifetime.
Right. Well, that's another way.
In
Yeah.
our children's lifetimes.
Right. And there was a debate on the afterlife between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, right? That there were different sects of Judaism.
Talking about
No, I know you're not talking about this, but I'm bringing it up because that is one of the ways the Sadducees did not really believe in an afterlife because they didn't need it. They were a more elite group, and I think they felt like you are rewarded and punished in this lifetime because looking at their own experience, the good prospered kind of thing. Not always in every case, but begadol in general. But the Pharisees, who were a little bit more, underprivileged or, less rewarded in this lifetime, absolutely believed in an afterlife where the balance is meted out, where the woes and suffering of this world is made whole in the world to come. So there is, it's extrapolating Ron's point that it may not be in the same moment, reward and punishment, but maybe in the next generation or maybe in the next lifetime.
I wasn't thinking.
I know.
Thinking future generations.
Yes, future. Yeah, your point was future generations, but I wanted to tack that on.
That was not.
No, I wasn't speaking for Ron. Okay, now I want us to get to this last text. So this is the Piazetzner Rabbi. This is this Hasidic rabbi who was murdered in the Holocaust and who wrote prolifically. And I recommend Eish Kodesh to anyone. Sacred Fire in English. Who wants to read this? Go for it, Sheila. Thanks.
Possibly because God is infinite, hence unknowable in the world, God's pain at the suffering of Jewish people is also infinite. Perhaps it is not impossible for any human to feel such immense pain. It is impossible even to apprehend the level of God's pain, to know that God bears it. Just to hear God's voice saying, "Woe to me that I raised my house, burnt my temple, and exiled my children among the Gentiles." It is impossible because it is beyond the boundaries of human comprehension.
So I just want to pause for 1 second. Do you see what he's doing? He isn't saying it's not one or the other. It's not God roars like a lion, according to Jeremiah. No, God coos like a dove, according to Rabbi Yossi and according to Elijah. It's both. God roars like a lion, wailing for God's people with that amount of intensity, but we can only hear the echoes like a cooing of a dove. Because we cannot comprehend the extent of God's pain and suffering, which is incomprehensible. We're only privy to hearing the echo of the lion's roar, which sounds to us like the cooing of a dove. So he's synthesizing the two. Okay, let's keep going.
It is only when Rabbi Yossi entered into the devastation of one of the rooms of Jerusalem, letting go somewhat of his self-centeredness, that the boundaries restricting his perception were also destroyed, and he was able to hear the voice of God. Even then, he heard only a little of a voice, for as he said, "I heard a divine voice cooing like a dove," while we know from the verse, God roars, howling over God's city, and God roars, as it were, like a lion over the destruction of the temple. And so the world continues to exist steadfast. It is not obliterated by God's pain and God's voice at the suffering of God's people and at the destruction of God's house, because God's pain never enters into the world. What it's saying, and it makes sense, is that we cannot know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really the beauty of life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as soon as we find all the cures for the diseases that we know of, some will come out.
Right.
Or, it is so complex. that all these people who are going and they're finding the new origins of the world and the origin today that they're, with that little piece of, that they found from the meteor. They're looking for the origins of people. It's all very nice, and sometimes I just wonder, I can't be bothered with this. It's all this, what do you call this kind of work? It's too intellectual for me. I can never understand it.
Uh-huh.
I'm willing to accept what's here and know that there are various paths. Nothing is going to ever be perfect because, like when we have rain, rain is very nice. Rain is good for the farmer, but it's not good if you're having an outdoor picnic.
Right.
So there are always going to be two sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, it's just comforting that, gee, there are some things I don't have to worry about.
Yeah. Good. Yes.
Somebody else.
I hear that. Absolutely.
Rain is good, but also if there is too much rain, it causes floods and
Right.
destruction.
Right.
There is a limit to everything.
Right. Absolutely.
Everything has two sides.
Hmm.
We wouldn't know if we didn't have the opposite, like we wouldn't know love if there wasn't hate,
Right.
Good without bad.
Right.
You need the opposite.
Right.
What you do
If
with.
we didn't look, we wouldn't have Tang.
If we didn't look, we wouldn't.
Tang,
What is that a reference to?
Yeah.
space
Drink.
program. The Tang was
So you don't-
invented.
It's too young.
Are you talking about the orange drink?
Yeah.
Yeah. There was wasn't there like a gorilla who was the mascot? I don't know. Okay. Okay. Yes.
Go back to the thing you discussed about the Shoah,
Mhm.
that God's presence was there, even though it was a
Mhm.
terrible time. We're told that God uses other countries as an
Right.
instrument. So the Babylonians were God's instrument
Right.
to bring around. That makes the Nazis God's instrument as well.
Perhaps if you made that, if you continued that logical assumption, then so I'll repeat it. So Jerry, so rabbinically, the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar is seen as God's instrument of punishment against Israel. And we're seeing this in our text, right? Woe to me that I had to exile my people, right? In the rabbinic theology, right, God is pulling the strings. It's because of us, like we have a role in all this. We have a role in what happens. It's not totally predetermined, right? We can always, tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, right? We can affect our fate, but it's still this reward and punishment system. So Jerry's saying if you accept that Nebuchadnezzar was God's instrument, who then, by the way, it says that God then punishes, and that's the cup of retribution that Jeremiah is supposed to give to the Babylonians, because they then went too far. They carried out God's punishment, but then they got haughty, right? And they oppressed us with a heavy hand, or they went too far. They got carried away, basically, right? But Jerry's saying, so then do you then apply that to the Nazis? And is that also God's instrument of punishment? And I think that is the danger of this theology that gets carried out. Personally, I do not think that, just like I don't think in the current situation that Hamas is an instrument of God's punishment. I think that's reprehensible to even entertain that. Yeah, but that is why that's not my theology. I believe in free will. I believe that people are capable of doing atrocious things because God does not necessarily act in the world in order to interfere with human free will. But does that mean that God does not exist or does not exist in our world? I'm offering these texts to push back on that understandable position by saying, no, God is here and God is on our side and God mourns with us, because I think that's helpful. And I think that helps me through times of crisis. That's not to say that you cannot doubt or question or reject God. All of that is within the Tachom, within the boundaries of Judaism. But for me, I need a God who is roaring like a lion in pain and whom I might be able to tap into the cooing of a dove wailing with me. What'd you say?
He's the best we have. We have no other. Gone. If we don't have God, we're gonna invent something. We invent science, we make up things. I mean, superstition is,
That's the whole question,
Yeah.
the whole thing.
So Hamas
That's
is
what I said.
the instrument of
I
God to
first
bring the
made a
Jews
visit.
together.
Well, so again, you're entitled to your own theology, right? So, and I'm not saying this is Helena's theology, but she was sharing a point there, like saying, well, but, Hamas being an instrument of God to bring the Jews together. There are ways you can look at it in ways that you can maintain that theology in a way that has a silver lining. But and I can't say no or yes to that. It's just for me, I don't see it that way. I sort of reject the, when we are attacked, that it's divine punishment because of our own sins. I don't go there, though. There's a tradition of the rabbis doing that. Yeah.
but I know of somebody
Mhm.
been persecuted.
Right.
The pogroms, the Inquisition, the Holocaust, right now with Hamas, over and over and over.
Still
I have to
exists.
believe it's free will and man can be evil.
Right. So that and I align with you there. I sort of make sense of the insensible by saying that human beings have free will, that God, for whatever reason, doesn't interfere with natural law or with human free will. But that doesn't mean that when you ask yourself, but how are we still here? Right? That doesn't preclude the possibility that God does still interact with us in some miraculous way, or that we can still access God, but just in a new way, not clinging to the ruins, but
Building upon.
building upon them. Thank you.
But we still yearn to go back to it.
Of course. No, it's still going to be a part of the unshakable, irrevocable fabric of who we are. But we're not going to be Lot's wife. We're not going to become a pillar of salt and paralyzed. And we have to continue to survive and find new ways of accessing God and being in Jewish community.
Why shouldn't we build a third temple now?
That'll be next session. We'll talk about it. Yeah. There are people who want to rebuild the third temple. Yeah, there are geopolitical ramifications of doing something like that. And there's also do you want to bring back animal sacrifice? There are a lot of questions you have to ask about that. But I think Midrash, right? One of the powers of Midrash is it gives us a model for adaptation and creativity and innovation and accessing God in a post-temple world. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I always highly value our discussions, and just want to send everybody chizuk and strength, while also sending you just the capacity to feel brokenhearted and a wreck, because sometimes chizuk isn't called for. Sometimes you just need to be broken. I agree. So I want to wish us both, of course.
So all these atrocities, everybody still blames Israel and the Jews and call
No, chazak ve'ematz, right? That was No, we of course need chizuk, and we also need to accept that it's okay not to feel strong. That's what I meant.
Now, this is the excerpt from Fox, that there's one Arab guy from Gaza who is condemning Hamas. He says, most of the people in Gaza we know that. They're not for Hamas.
Yeah.
And he said, stop blaming Hamas, stop blaming the Jews. Hamas leaders are the ones who have caused all this, because they are the ones who are preventing the people from having a decent livelihood.
It's good to draw that distinction and remember that Hamas doesn't represent all Palestinians. Yeah. Right. Yes.
Can't get out. There's nowhere for them to go.
Right.
Nobody wants them again. It doesn't want it.
Right.
It's very interesting.
You know how many Jordan killed Palestinians? in 48, nobody even thinks about it.
They don't want you could.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I learned today that the Hamas leadership was in Qatar.
Yeah.
They're not in the Gaza.
No, they're not.
They're,
Said that they were outside.
they're in Qatar.
They don't care about killing their own people.
Oh, anybody who removes it.
It gives them a, and do it again.
It haven't happened. It's it.
It's bad enough that they killed them and they.
So for more processing tonight, I think it's at 6:15. Let me confirm, but oh, I have 6:15. Is it 5:15? I think it's 6:15. Yeah, there's an email that went out. Yeah, we're creating spaces for grief processing as a community. And all of our emotions, not just grief, but Thursday. Yeah. So today, 6:15 to 7:15, Friday, tomorrow, 4 o'clock to 5, and then Shabbat, 10 to 11. Yeah. If people want to step out and have more processing, that's going to be available as a resource. Okay, everyone. Thanks again for joining. It's wonderful.